Hi everyone. Today we will talk about Immanuel Kant's grounding for the metaphysics of morals. So let's start with the section 1. So sa section 1, paragraphs 1 to 3, ang sinasabi ni Kant dito na the only thing truly good in this world without any doubt is having a good will. Sure, yung intelligence daw, humor, good judgment, and other mental talents are great to have. Likewise, qualities like yung courage, determination, and persistence are valuable. But they can turn in bad if they're not guided by a good will. So kahit yung mga powers, wealth, fame, and health can make someone arrogant if they're not balanced by a good will. If someone seems to have everything but lacks a goodwill, it's not impressive daw to someone who thinks fairly. So essential daw talaga yung goodwill for deserving happiness. Sinasabi din niya sa paragraphs na to na a goodwill is valuable not because of what it achieves, but simply because it's good on its own. So kahit yung goodwill can't achieve its goals, valuable pa rin siya like a precious jewel that shines on its own. Sa paragraphs 4 to 7 naman, he discussed the idea that our will, our desires and decisions might have an absolute value. And yung absolute value na yon, ito yung independent of any practical outcomes or benefits. Sinasuggest ni Kant na kung yung happiness or well-being ay yung main goal ng nature, then our actions and behavior would be guided more by instinct rather than reason. Instinct would lead us to do what's best for our survival and happiness automatically without needing to think about it. Kant argues na yung kung reason naman were given to us, it wouldn't be to figure out how to make ourselves happy because instinct would do that more effectively. So sinuggest niya na maybe yung nature intended for instinct to handle that job while yung reason naman serves a different purpose altogether. Inintroduce din niya sa paragraphs na to yung concept of mythology. Ito yung hatred of reason that arises kapag yung individuals na-realize nila na despite all their efforts to use reason to pursue happiness, nag-end up pa rin sila ng ng feeling of burdened than fulfilled. Kant suggests that this sentiment is particularly common among those people who are highly educated or experienced sa paggamit ng reason. They might have invented various luxuries or made advancement in knowledge through science, but ultimately they realize that these achievements don't necessarily lead to greater happiness. So as a result, pwede daw silang mainggit sa mga tao na guided more by their natural instinct rather than reason. However, Kant argues na yung reason has been given to us as a practical faculty, meaning it's meant to influence our will to produce a will that is not just good as a means to an end, but inherently good in itself. Naniniwala si Kant na yung nature nag-ooperate siya with purpose, and yung reason ay kailangan daw para ma-fulfill yung purpose na yon by cultivating a will that is morally good. Dito, inintroduce niya yung concept of duty, which encompasses the idea of a good will. Yung duty, ito yung nire-recognize niya or nag-a-adhere siya sa moral obligations, even when faced with subjective obstacles or temptations. So, meron tayong 4 cases of actions dito. Yung case 1 involves those actions which are contrary to duty. Ito yung example niya, yung lying, cheating, stealing, yung masama talaga by nature. Yung case number 2 involves those which accord with duty, but for which a person perhaps has no immediate inclination, though he does have immediate inclination there too. For example, one pays his taxes not because he likes to, but in order to avoid the penalties set for delinquents. Yung case number 3 naman involves those which accord with duty and for which a person does have an immediate inclination. Ang example niya dito, na yung tao daw ay gusto daw nilang i-preserve yung own life nila naturally. It's a basic instinct that we all have, na despite having a natural inclination to preserve our lives, can suggest that simply doing so because of this inclination doesn't necessarily have moral value. It's just something we do out of self-preservation, not because it's morally right. Yung case number 4 naman, sinabi niya, tinuloy niya yung example niya kanina, na if someone finds themselves in a situation where they no longer enjoy life due to extreme adversity or sorrow, yet they still choose to preserve their life kasi naniniwala sila na duty nila yon, then their actions have moral value. kahit ayaw na nilang mabuhay dito sa mundo, they continue to do so out of sense of duty or moral obligation. Ngayon, sa paragraphs 14 to 16, nag-introduce siya ng 3 propositions. Yung first, sinasabi niya na an action must be done from duty in order to have any moral worth. Implicit lang siyang sinabi dun sa mismong book, pero parang ganito yung example niya. Suppose na yung person nag-decide siya na mag-return ng wallet dun sa rightful owner. Kapag ginawa nila yun, dahil may sense of duty sila to help other people, yung action na yun has moral worth according to Kant. Pero kapag ginawa lang nila yun dahil natatakot silang ma-punish or dahil gusto nila makareceive ng reward, then yung action nila yun, walang moral worth. Yung second proposition naman, it is an action done from duty, has its moral worth, not in the purpose that is to be attained by it, but in the maxim according to which the action is determined. In simple words, Kant's second proposition, sinasabi niya na yung what makes an action morally good is not what it achieves, but why and how it's done. So imagine na yung friend mo at saka ikaw tumulong ka sa ibang tao. Ngayon, kapag ginawa mo yun dahil gusto mo lang talagang makatulong sa iba, then morally good yung ginawa mo. Pero kapag tumulong ka dahil gusto mo lang magmukhang mabait sa iba, then naglalak yung action na yon ng moral worth. Yung third proposition naman, sinasabi niya na duty is the necessity of an action done out of respect for the law. In other words, the only object worthy of respect is the law itself, which serves as a command. An action daw, done from duty, must completely disregard personal inclinations and desires, focusing solely on adherence to the law. Therefore, yung will is determined by our will is determined by the objective law and subjectively by pure respect dun sa law na yon. This means na kahit yung inclination natin are opposed sa ginagawa natin, kailangan fina-follow pa rin daw natin yung law kasi magde-demonstrate yon ng commitment to duty above personal desires. Ngayon, sa paragraphs 17 to 19, Kant proposes that for an action to be truly good without exception, it must be guided by a principle rooted in universal conformity to law. Ibig sabihin nito na yung moral principle behind an action should be one that could be applied universally sa lahat ng tao sa parehong sitwasyon without any special considerations or exemptions. Kant introduces the concept of maxim, which is a personal rule guiding individuals' actions. He argues na yung action is morally good if yung maxim could be willed to become a universal law for everyone. So for example, kung kino-consider mo na mag-lie in a specific situation, i-ask mo muna daw yung sarili mo if you honestly will that everyone always lies in similar situation. If not, then lying in that instance would be morally wrong according to Kant's reasoning. Sinasuggest niya na itong principle na to of universal conformity to law is crucial for ensuring na yung moral duty ay hindi lang siya theoretical concept but has practical significance. Yung last paragraphs naman niya, sinasabi na Kant talks about how people face a conflict between doing what is right and following their desires for happiness. He says, our natural tendency is to question moral principles and giving in to our desires. Ngayon, Kant believes that when faced with this conflict, our common sense reason is pushed to look for guidance in philosophy. So, Kant suggests na yung deep thinking about morality can help us stay on the right path even when it's tough.
Ngayon, magbubuo naman tayo sa second section, which is the transition from popular moral philosophy to a metaphysics of moral. Now, the question is, are there any people who act due to pure duty? According kay Immanuel Kant, mahirap magbigay ng isang distinguished na halimbawa na kung saan ang isang tao ay kumikilos out of pure duty. Sinasabi niya na while most of our actions are in accordance with duty, yung genuine virtue remains elusive. Meaning, yes, nag-iisip siya if true virtue is to be found in the world. Pero hindi ibig sabihin nun ay hindi totoo ang principles of moral judgment. So, just because there are no completely sincere people in the world doesn't mean that sincerity isn't morally worthy. Now, how can we say that an action is moral? Ano nga ba ang characteristics ng isang moral judgment? Unang-una, it should be true and also universal for all rational beings. Meaning, regardless of specific circumstances, ang moral judgment ay absolute necessity. Thus, kailangan nating i-recognize na it would be impossible for us na i-derive yung universal moral laws sa specific events and experiences ng isang tao. Kasi ayon kay Kant, every event is na-impluwensyahan ng isang particular factor. Sa madaling salita, yung specific examples, hindi sila dapat gawing or sapat bilang pangunahing padayan para sa pagbuo ng isang komprehensibong filosofiya ng moral. Dapat mag-rely more on robust and systematic methods of analysis and reasoning or a priori, kaysa mag-draw ng conclusions from individual cases. So, dapat yung mga moral concepts ay rooted in reason. Kapag tayo ay nag-incorporate ng real-life examples sa mga konseptong ito, we somehow diminish their ability to teach moral lessons. Furthermore, yung moral philosophy derives its understanding of morality from the fact na tayong mga humans ay rational beings. Notably, everything in nature works according to the law. And only yung mga rational beings ang may kakayahang intindihin at i-apply ang universal law, which is to act morally. Maliban doon, tayong mga rational beings lang ang may will, and yung wills natin ay guided by practical reason, o yung reason na apply to practical situations. Additionally, yung will natin is inherently our own. So meaning hindi siya pwedeng i-justify ng external forces, like si God, divine, or yung conscience natin. Bale yung justification ng actions natin must come from within ourselves, which is based on rational deliberation. Now, paano natin malalaman kung yung will natin is nagli-lean in sa pagiging rational? The will must choose to do what reason identifies as objectively necessary. Ibig sabihin dapat yung will natin is recognize yung objective necessity as something subjectively necessary o yung mga bagay na dapat natin gawin sa isang specific na situation. So si Kant, sinasabi niya na yung representation ng objective principle ay imperative. Ang imperatives, ito yung mga statements of obligation like, I ought to do this. Now, si Kant, in-emphasize niya na yung will natin are not always determined by imperatives. Kasi sometimes gumagawa tayo ng actions na rooted sa personal desires natin. Base kasi ito sa libro ni Kant, he distinguishes between imperatives, which are yung objective rules, and maxims, yung mga subjective rules. Imperatives are considered objective kasi if reason completely determined the will, actions they prescribe would always occur. So, palagi mangyayari. However, ang tao may not always act in accordance with imperatives if gumawa sila ng action on a particular maxim. Ang maxim kasi refers to subjective principles na nag-guide sa actions ng individuals. Ngayon, sinasabi ni Kant na if yung reason completely determines yung will ng isang tao, mag-a-act sila not in contrary sa supreme principle of morality. However, ang tao pwede mag-act against the principle if maxim is involved. For example, magnanakaw ka para yumaman ka. Hence, according to Kant, we should always evaluate the morality of our actions by examining the maxims behind them. Ngayon si Kant, nag-present siya ng types of imperatives. Bale, it can either be hypothetical or categorical. Anong pinagkaiba ng dalawa? Ang hypothetical imperative, pinapertain nito yung mga actions na we ought to take but only if we have some particular goal or purpose or desired ends. For example, I will not lie because no one will trust me if I do. Ang categorical imperatives naman, sinasabi dito na there are these actions na we ought to take as it is necessary. Regardless of doing this action is ma-attain natin yung gusto natin. For example, you should not lie. Bale, ang pinagkaiba nito sa kanina is yung hypothetical imperative, conditional siya at driven by our desire to be trusted. Pero yung categorical, basta bawal mag-lie. Ngayon, delving deeper sa hypothetical imperative, mayroong two types of hypothetical, ang general imperatives of skill and assertory. Ang general imperative of skill is pinapertain nito ang isang action is good for a possible purpose. For example, if you want to visit your grandstone, then you ought to go to New York. If you want to get better at math, syempre, you need to practice. So these imperatives make no judgment about the value of the end in question, only the fitness of the means to the end. So means yung tinitignan dito, hindi kinokonsidera yung ends. Ang assertoric imperatives naman is pinapertain nito ang isang action is good for some purpose everyone has. bale it directed towards an end that everyone recognizes as good, which is happiness. Despite uncertainties about what happiness truly means, these imperatives guide actions based on provisional suggestions derived from personal experiences. So while yung assertoric ay more complex dahil sa uncertainties tungkol sa happiness, they function similarly to imperatives of skill. Ang pinagkaiba lamang ay yung focus. Yung general imperatives, ina-apply yung objectivity sa means, while yung assertoric doon naman sa ends. So maliban doon, it is important to take note that Kant suggests that there are no imperatives of prudence because the means to promote happiness cannot be prescribed with certainty. Ngayon, ibahin natin yung categorical imperatives sa technical and assertoric hypothetical. Ang categorical imperative does not involve judgment about sa means and ends kasi they are concerned about sa things that are inherently good in themselves. So, para maiba siya sa ibang imperatives, sinasabi ni Kant na ang categorical imperatives, they are said to be either rules of skills, counsels of prudence, or commands of morality. So according to Kant, only judgment based on categorical imperatives are truly moral because they are objective, absolute, and apply universally to rational beings. Pero may concern na yung categorical imperatives might be mistaken for hypothetical imperatives, where yung judgment of skill or means ay nasasama. Like for example, kapag sinabi mong, you shouldn't deceive other people, pwede nating assume na you're making categorical judgment, pwedeng may underlying incentive, like you want to avoid being exposed as a liar. Therefore, si Kant, ina-aim niya na ma-uncover yung essence ng morality, which cannot be derived empirically but must be understood through rational analysis. So para masabi ng categorical imperative, dapat we should act in a manner where the principle guiding our actions can be universally applied as a law. Ang action ko ba ay pwedeng universal law? Titignan kung ang personal rules natin ay aligned with universal moral principles. Ngayon, para mas maintindihan, nagbigay si Kant ng 4 na application ng categorical imperative. First, suicide. Kapag ang isang tao ay depressed at gusto niya magpakamatay. Ngayon, to know if it's moral, tatanungin mo yung sarili mo, would this be action can be acceptable as universal law? Ang sagot is hindi. It cannot be a universal law. Because if everyone were to kill themselves in times of misery, it would contradict the preservation of life, which is essential para mag-function ng isang society. Next, borrowing money but never paying it back. Ngayon, base kay Kant, tanungin mo yung sarili mo, pwede ba itong maging isang basis for universal law? No, it cannot be. Kasi if lahat gagawin ang hindi pagbabayad ng utang, lending would cease to exist. Wala nang magpapautang. Next, you have a talent but choose not to cultivate it kasi comfortable yung circumstances mo. Ngayon, you're gonna ask yourself again, nababiolate ba nito yung categorical imperative? Yes, kasi if everyone neglected their talent, human progress would stagnate. Like, yung di tayo makapag-benefit sa sanang human capacities natin. Next, a person who never borrows money and therefore never lends it either. This too cannot be a universal law because it would deprive individuals of assistance when they need it. If lahat ng tao ay heartless, then none of us could find assistance in times of need. Ina-undermine niya yung principle ng reciprocity and mutual aid. In essence, the categorical prompts individual to consider whether their actions could be universal laws, and if not, they should reconsider what they are doing.
So moving on to the second half of the second section, in order to explain the connection between self-determination and ends, there comes a question, should there be a law for us to judge our actions based on universal principles? So in order to find out this connection, masasagot natin siya using Kant's Metaphysics of Morals. Yung end refers to the ground of self-determination. Or in simple words, yung decision kung ano nga ba yung tama. And para malaman mo yun, kung ano nga ba yung tama, kailangan universally valid siya. And it must be given by reason alone. Which, yung universality ng moral judge, which is similar sa universality of moral judgments na sinabi kanina ni Keeanne. So, unlike sa psychology, which focuses on real-life reasons. Sa Metaphysics of Morals, we focus on rules, kung ano yung dapat mangyari, hindi kung ano yung feeling natin tama o mali, o nakakabuti, or nakakasama para sa atin. So, ang example nito is, let's say, meron kang choice if tutulong ka sa isang beggar o hindi, or i-ignore mo siya. According sa Metaphysics of Morals, yung idea is that the reason you chose not to help or help should be based kung kaya nga ba ng iba yung ginawa mo. Hindi siya based kung ano yung nararamdaman mo at the time or kung ano yung circumstances. So, hina-highlight nito yung reason kung bakit, yung reason niya and yung objectively practical laws na naka-implement sa society natin. Rather than yung pag-rely natin sa sarili nating experience o sa sarili nating feelings. Next naman is means and ends. So we usually hear this ends justifies the means na sinasabi. And from that itself, it explains kung ano nga ba yung means at ends. Ang means ay kung ano yung causes or kung paano natin ina-achieve yung end. Yung end naman is kung ano yung result ng action na yun. So yun yung ultimate goal natin and yun yung dahilan kung bakit natin yung ginagawa natin or yung actions natin. Next is incentive and motive. So, para maintindihan natin to ng madalian, incentive is yung subjective ends, while yung motive is yung objective ends. And then, yung incentive is kung ano yung factors na nagdadrive sa atin para gawin yung particular course of action. So, sa context ng means, yung incentives is kung ano yung nagmo-motivate or nag-engage sa atin para ma-achieve yung specific end. While yung motive naman is yung objective na concept kung saan or yung reason kung bakit gusto natin i-pursue yung certain end. So, siya yung nag-justify kung bakit natin napili yung end na yun. Next slide, please. Next is yung formal and material principles. Sa formal, it is focused more on structure rather than content kasi hindi mo siya makikita. It is abstract. So, better natin siya maintindihan using the example. Nabanggit din to kanina, yung sinasabing bawal magsinungaling or do not lie. Nabanggit siya sa categorical imperative. And ang sabi kanina, universal truth, universally accepted fact, ang pagsisinungaling ay mali. And it has an unconditional nature, meaning hindi niya kailangan na align siya sa circumstances or kung sino yung involved. Basta, yung idea ng pagsisinungaling ay masama. Next naman is yung material principle. Sa material principle, it's content over structure. So, kasi concrete yung actions niya. And it's pretty subjective. So, yung desire ng isang tao involved dito, siya yung nagde-determine kung worth it ba gawin yung isang bagay. Pero kahit sabihin natin worth it, hindi siya enough para gawing universal principle or practical law siya. So, example nito is yung help others to gain personal satisfaction. So, ayan, na-check niya yung sinasabing concrete action, subjective, kasi aligned siya sa moral value or yung desire ng isang person na gagawa nung sinasabing tumulong para sa kanyang personal satisfaction. Next is yung perfect duty and imperfect duty. Para ma-distinguish natin sila, yung perfect duty is lagi mo siya dapat sundin. Hindi mo siya pwedeng ma-violate. So, an example is not committing suicide. Sabi kanina, further siya ma-explain later, but hindi siya pwedeng ma-violate. Kasi nga, sinabi na kapag nag-commit ka ng suicide, just to escape a certain problem, tama ba na ginagawa mo siya kapag, tama ba na ginagawa mo siya Kasi, kasi pati yung ibang tao, kung mapunta sila sa certain situation na pareho sa'yo, dapat ba gawin din nila yun? So, hindi mo pwedeng i-violate yung duty na to. And then, we have imperfect duty, which is, nagmamatter naman kung ano yung situation. So, let's say you have a talent and you have a responsibility to share it with others ba? Hindi. Kasi, let's say, marunong ka mag-gitara and you have the opportunity to share your skills para magbigay ng saya sa iba. Pero, imperfect duty to kasi hindi ka naman obligated to play. Kailangan lagi ka mag-play ng guitar, hindi. Pero, sinasabi na you should do it whenever possible para makapag-contribute ka positively sa society natin. Next is yung formula of humanity and inherent value. So, sabi ni Kant is, ang human daw ay mayroon inherent value or dapat treated kayo and dapat treated ang lahat ng tao as an end and hindi means. So, an example nito is, ayun nga, yung suicide. So, ang duty natin sa sarili natin is, sabi ni Kant, if iniisip mo daw na mag-commit, dapat i-consider mo nga yung kung ang iba ba napunta sa same situation sa'yo, na nahihirapan ka sa problems mo, dapat ba gawin din nila yon as an escape? Yung way daw na yon na pag-escape ng problema is like using yourself as a tool just to get to the end na gusto mo, which is to escape. Sabi ni Kant, yung mga tao daw dapat hindi ginagawang tool or hindi ginagamit. We should always see ourselves as someone na important and valuable. Kaya yung argument niya is inconsistent to dun sa idea na merong freedom yung mga tao. Pero, mas umaangat yung moral principle na vina-value natin yung humanity as an end itself and not means. Next is yung formula of autonomy. So, yung formula of autonomy muna. Let's say it's a group project. It's a group project. We did this na pareho kaming gumawa ng rules namin for ourselves, pero fina-follow din namin siya. So, kami yung both followers and creators ng rules. So, nag-express kami nun ng autonomy kasi nag-participate kami sa sarili naming paggawa ng rules. So, if i-apply natin to dun sa kingdom of ends, ito naman yung society kung saan nagko-contribute yung mga tao na gumawa, pati na mag-follow ng sinasabing moral laws. So, yung mga individuals, na-recognize nila yung sarili nilang value, kaya sila nagpa-participate dun sa process ng paggawa ng principles. And the kingdom itself is, yun yung mismong society kung saan ine-exercise yung authority. So, lastly is yung autonomy versus heteronomy. Autonomy is, essentially, it's being free from external influences. So, yung mga individuals, ginagawa nila yung mga actions nila kasi based yun sa morals nila. While heteronomy naman is yung opposite. May external forces na nag-drive sa kanila para gawin yung actions. For instance, kung ako gusto kong mag-volunteer sa isang charity, if yung intention ko is out of my morals, that's autonomy. Pero if someone forced me to, or kunwari peer pressure, or societal pressure, that's heteronomy. Because I was influenced by external factors rather than my own internal moral principles.
Now, we will end this presentation with a quote from Immanuel Kant. Quote, always recognize that human individuals are ends and do not use them as means to your end, unquote. And that's all for our presentation.